Boyfriend demands I ask permission to make turns while driving, igniting control issues and sparking doubts about our relationship dynamics. I'm a 23-year-old woman in a long-term, exclusive relationship with my 28-year-old boyfriend. We've been together for almost 5 years now. We're not engaged, but our lives are solidly intertwined. Our finances are pooled, we work at the same place, and we share everything. Except maybe the experience of driving. The car, which has become more important than I expected, is technically in my name. I had the better credit, so that's how we bought it, and I paid the $2,000 down payment. Still, since our money is together, every biweekly car payment is really from both of us. The insurance covers us both, and that's paid from the shared account as well. My boyfriend is almost always the one behind the wheel. He's a bit of a control freak and loves to drive. I'm more indifferent about it. If he's tired or not feeling up to it, sometimes he'll have me drive, but usually, he takes the wheel. But here's where things start to get weird. There are a few things about driving that we argue about, not just small tiffs. The first is his insistence that I use GPS at all times, even for a trip down the street to the corner store. Yet, if he's in the car with me, he wants me to ignore GPS and instead follow his way even though the GPS has to stay on. I end up juggling directions from both a satellite and my boyfriend. But the really controlling stuff? He hates when I drive without him. It actually stresses him out, to the point where he'll even change his own plans just to sit passenger just so he can be there when I drive. Most of the time, I don't get too bothered by it, but there's an irritation simmering beneath the surface. Is trust really that hard? Sometimes I just want to feel a little independence. Then, there's the absolute clincher, the thing we fight about most. If I need to turn, change lanes, or do anything, he insists I ask permission first. Before I turn on my signal, I need to say something like, "Signal to left lane, okay?" and wait for his go-ahead. If I don't, or I argue about it, it blows up into a problem. Even if we're just heading to the corner store or somewhere we go all the time, I have to ask him turn right, and get his blessing. It's not just annoying, it's humiliating, especially when you realize that he never holds himself to the same standard. I said to him once, if my driving decisions affect you, then yours affect me. Yet you don't ever check with me before changing lanes or turning. Why is that? His answer? He says people have different boundaries, and this has never bothered me in the past, so if I suddenly ask him to do the same, it's manipulative. It's just me trying to match his instead of respecting a real boundary of my own. Apparently, my feelings don't count because I didn't think of them first. Sitting in a car with other couples, I can't help but notice their dynamics are nothing like ours. Nobody else plays this weird game, this ritual of asking permission at every single turn. Some days I wonder if it's really as bizarre as it seems, or if his reasoning actually makes sense and this is just a quirk I should accept. But then I notice, year after year, the slower erosion of independence. Sometimes it worries me. Still, I remind myself that I don't really need to be super independent. Maybe that's why it bothers me less often. I become unsure. Am I making this a bigger issue than it really is? Today, things finally exploded. We had a huge fight because I honestly, for my own pride, didn't ask to put on my turning signal. Who needs to ask to signal? It's embarrassing. Now he's icing me out, not speaking to me. Outside of this, everything else in our relationship is good. And maybe that's what keeps me hesitating, second-guessing whether this is a minor quirk or something I shouldn't ignore at all. You need to validate my fucking boundaries with some bad experience? Wait, make you fucking feel better if I got into a car crash, is that what you fucking want? I tried to backtrack, stammering that no, of course I didn't want that, but I did need to know if something had caused it. That led to us fighting in the car, arguing until we were both raw and exhausted. I was furious and just done. He started talking about his boundaries again. So I shot back, well, my boundary is not being an abuse victim. I regret it, but I couldn't help how it spilled out. He flipped, screaming, "Who told you that? Who are you talking to?" Which made me push back, "Do you think I don't have any of my own thoughts?" He stormed out of the car and slammed the door, yelling that I didn't love him, that I only cared about myself, that I was going to ruin his reputation. Usually, he wants me to chase after him. Not this time. I was so disgusted, I just left him there, turned off my phone, and drove to our apartment. Part of me planned to grab as much of my stuff as I could, my cat above all, and run off right away. But barely 10 minutes had passed before he barged in, dragging along our boss, who was one of the veterinarians that owned the clinic where we worked. The scene that followed was surreal. My boyfriend started ranting, telling our boss how I was cheating, how I was trying to take everything from him, how I played him for a fool. He even called the car his, venting to both me and our boss, then saying I should just be grateful he let me drive his car. That was the final straw. I snapped. Right in front of them, I started tearing through our bank account records, loudly adding up how every cent of his paycheck went to nonsense video games, his parents, whatever. The guy barely put $300 toward our shared bills each month. If I got that much, I'd be lucky. Determined, I sent almost everything from my paycheck to my best friend through a Cash App and started a hardship withdrawal from my retirement account. The check would be sent to my mom's house. While the chaos erupted around me, I texted my best friend and begged her to come over immediately, told her that I was leaving him and that I was scared. My boss kept telling me to calm down and let my boyfriend drive me to a hotel for the night, so I could cool off, but there was no way I was leaving my car or my cat. I stood my ground and waited. Eventually, my friend showed up and my boyfriend lost it completely. My boss tried saying I was being unfair for getting other people involved. The irony was lost on him, apparently. My boyfriend threatened to call the cops, and I told him to go ahead. The car was in my name, and if it came down to a police report, I'd love for them to have the record. That really shook him. He started crying, going on and on about how I was ruining his reputation, demanding to know what I'd said about him and swearing I was spreading lies. But in the end, I managed to leave. I got out with my friend, my cat, and a car. I haven't set foot back at work, nor do I plan to. My boyfriend has shown up at my friend's apartment twice now. I don't want to put her in danger, so I've decided to move in with my mom, a few hours away. I wish I could say I feel empowered, like a weight has been lifted, but the truth is far messier than that. I feel embarrassed by how things went down. I feel guilty, even though I know I did what I had to, and I am just so tired. All I want is to sleep for a year and forget this whole nightmare. Looking back, I can't shake the feeling that he did all of this by some twisted playbook. Thinking about it, he didn't always have the controlling driving routine. It only started after we got the new car. Maybe he really did look up ways to control me. If it was truly always a boundary, wouldn't he have acted like this from the start? It makes me realize it was never a boundary, it was just another tool to control me. Update 2. I thought getting to my mom's would feel like the end of the story. It was the start of its own weird chapter. The first night, I parked under her porch light and tried to sleep with my cat tucked under my arm like a seatbelt. Around 2 a.m. my phone buzzed with this chirpy little alert about an unknown device moving with me. I told myself it was a glitch from my earbuds. It buzzed again at 5. I got out of bed and tore through the car in my pajamas, shaking, pulling out floor mats like a raccoon in a dumpster. Nothing. I went back inside, locked the door, and cursed my brain for inventing sounds. The next afternoon I drove to the grocery store and the alert went off again, louder in the parking lot. I took everything out of the trunk this time, and when I lifted the carpet over the spare, I found it, a gray coin, taped to the well with blue painter's tape like a kindergarten art project. I swear it looked smug. I didn't touch it. I slammed the trunk, got back in the car, and drove to the police station with my heart punching the inside of my ribs. I didn't make it there. A mile from the station, 2 cruisers lit me up from behind like I'd won a horrible parade. One cut me off, the other blocked my lane, and suddenly I was parked in the middle of a quiet street with my hands flat on the steering wheel, telling myself not to cry while my cat howled in the carrier. An officer approached, palm out, careful voice, asking who I was and whether I knew I was in a stolen vehicle. Of course he reported it stolen. Of course. I told them my name and that the car was in my name. I said it 3 times because I couldn't stop myself. I handed over the registration, the loan papers I'd put in a folder because I've started carrying my whole life on a clipboard, and waited while they walked back and forth to the cruisers. 10 minutes felt like an hour. When they finally brought my documents back, the older officer's face had gone soft around the eyes. He apologized. He said they get domestics like this sometimes. He asked if I wanted to come down to the station and make a report about the tracker and the false theft call. I did. They escorted me the last half mile. I left the car with them in the lot and a woman in a cardigan brought me into a warm office with 2 chairs and a box of tissues on a table like they knew exactly how it would go. I gave my statement about the air egg. I told them about him showing up at my friend's, about the scene with our boss, about the screaming in the car. The cardigan woman took notes, nodding, small questions, not too many. She asked if I wanted a temporary protective order. I said I didn't think I was that kind of person. She said that wasn't a type of person, it was a piece of paper. I signed. They photographed the tracker before an officer peeled it up with a pen and dropped it into an evidence bag. He scanned the serial with his phone like he was checking a price at a grocery store, then read me the name that it was registered under. My boyfriend's email, the dumb one he uses when he signs up for video games. I didn't need to hear it, but hearing it did something final in my head anyway. By dinner, a judge had signed the temporary order. A deputy said they would serve him that night. I sat in the station's front bench until my hand stopped splintering apart, and then I drove home slow, the long way, my cat asleep this time. I kept looking in the rearview mirror like something else would pop up behind me with lights. Nothing did. Still, I factory reset the head unit of the car in my mom's driveway and changed the passwords to everything I could remember ever having. The clinic blew up next. I ignored calls all day, but one of the techs I trusted more than my own instinct sent me a video, no warning, just press send and let me see it in full screen. It was him in the lobby, voice climbing octaves, telling our receptionist I'd stolen his car and his cat and that we were to call the police and close the doors so I couldn't drive off if I dared to show my face. He said it like he was Romeo at a balcony and the whole waiting room was the chorus. Our boss stepped in front of him, palms out, a client holding a dachshund started crying, and then my boyfriend grabbed the office phone off the counter and dialed 911 while the line of appointments watched. 2 kennel assistants walked him to the parking lot while he shouted arrest her into the receiver and the dachshund peed on the floor. A little later, another owner, the one who never raises his voice, called me himself. He said he was sorry for being dragged into my apartment, sorry for not getting a handle on it faster. He told me my boyfriend had been escorted off the property and put on leave. He said they had an HR person now for the first time in forever and she would mail me my last check if I didn't want to walk in. I told him I didn't. He asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know what that meant right now, but yes, probably more than last week. That night the deputy called to say they'd served him. 10 minutes later my mom's porch camera pinged and my phone lit with a dozen unknown numbers. I didn't answer. Then an email landed from an address I didn't recognize at first, something like co-pilot coach, and the subject line was agreement. Inside was a wall of text about how he would accept me living with my mother if I agreed to FaceTime him every time I drove, to keep the camera on the road and my hands visible, to send my location before commencing motion, and to accept real-time feedback for safety. He said this was his compromise. He said he'd typed it calmly because this was how we rebuild trust. I forwarded it to the officer and put it in a folder on my desktop labeled evidence, because what else do you call it? 2 days later I went back to the apartment with a police standby to get my things. He wasn't there. The locks had been swapped since I left, but the landlord opened the door for me and stood in the hall with the officer while I filled boxes with my life. My cat's toys, the blender I actually used, my great-grandma's quilt, my passport. On the coffee table, there was a laminated sheet with headings and bullet points I wouldn't let myself read, just the corner that said "Turn Protocol" in a font he must have spent time choosing. I slid it into a manila envelope without looking because I didn't want to give it the dignity of my attention in the room where he'd written it. On my way out, the landlord apologized in that too bright way people do when they want to be helpful. He said my boyfriend had come in earlier with a screwdriver, sweating through his shirt, demanding to change the locks for safety. He'd seemed nervous, like he expected someone to jump out of the closet. About what? I asked. About you, he said, and then, about your driving so flatly that I started laughing right there in the stairwell. It sounded unhinged even to me. The officer put a box down and then picked it back up like he'd thought better of trying to pat my shoulder. I'm learning stupid specific new things, like how to stand at a counter and open a bank account without my hands shaking. How to explain to an insurance agent that no, please, take him off, we are not a household. How to breathe when my mom says my name and sounds relieved that I answer. How to put my cat carrier on the passenger seat and have it be the only living thing over there. How to drive through a yellow light, without narrating it to a person who isn't there. There's a court date for the order next week. My friend has the rant he did in my apartment recorded because she hit voice memos when he started and forgot to turn it off. I have the tracker bag and the false police report number and the email where he tried to make me sign on to his agreement. I don't know how it will go. I don't know if he will show up with a stack of papers in plastic sleeves. I don't know if a judge will look at all this and think it sounds made up, because if I weren't inside it, I might. Tonight I went to get gas. It was dark and the station was half empty and my mom texted me, "You good?" When I took too long finding a pump that didn't look sticky. I filled a tank, got back in, and instead of taking the familiar left home, I stayed in the right lane and took the longer road, the one past the baseball field and the lemon yellow house with a porch swing. I flipped my blinker on and didn't say a word to anyone about it. The click-click filled the car. My cat slept through it. Nobody yelled. Nobody made me defend the decision to a waiting gallery of one. I made it turn because I wanted to. The world stayed in one piece. It felt like swallowing air after holding my breath for a year. Update 3. Court smelled like lemon cleaner and dust that's too old to move anymore. The bailiffs tied tiny blue squares that looked like pixels. I'd been up since 5, ironed a shirt I never iron, ate 3 Cheez-Its and called it breakfast. My hands only felt like mine when I was holding the manila envelope. He was in the second row with a binder fat enough to have a spine, plastic sleeves flashing under the fluorescence. I didn't try to read the tabs, but the first one was in that same bold font I'd seen on my coffee table turned protocol as size you use when you want people to salute. He'd combed his hair too carefully. He didn't look at me and then he did, fast, like he'd been practicing not looking and forgot. The hearing was 12 minutes long by the wall clock with a jumpy second hand. The judge had the voice of someone who has raised 3 teenagers and is not taking on a 4th. I answered questions, yes and no in the smallest sentences I could make. I slid the AirTag bag across, the email printout with Copilot in the address, the picture of his laminated sheet. The judge asked him if he'd placed a tracking device on my car. He said, "It's not a tracker, Your Honor, it's a safety coin, like renaming it could make it harmless." The judge looked at him for a beat long enough to make a whole new personality and said, "Did you put it there?" He said yes. He started to read from the binder something about agreements, something about how I had escalating risk behaviors like turning without consulting, and the judge held up a palm in a perfect parent hand stop. "Sir," she said, "boundaries are what you set for yourself. What you're describing is control." He said he was trying to keep me and the general public from harm. He said driver's ed recommends narration. He smiled the way he does when he thinks he's landed the closing argument, and the judge said, "Then take a class. You don't get to deputize yourself over another adult." He tried the car angle again, called it ours. The registration with my name on it looked ridiculous under the plastic of his sleeve, like a hostage. Behind glass. The judge told him not to call in false thefts, not to use the court or the police to harass people, and granted the order for a year. No contact, no third-party contact, no tech, no showing up, anywhere I am. She told him to return any keys he had and not to touch any of my property. The bailiff returned our papers in a stack. My hand shook anyway. He said, "But what if she?" and the judge said, "We're done," in a tone I want a bottle. I walked down the courthouse steps into hard sun, the paper warmed through my folder. My mom waited in the car and squeezed my elbow when I got in, like that was our version of a hug we both could do in daylight. On the way home we passed a driving school storefront with a cardboard cutout teen holding a foam steering wheel. I laughed so hard at the green felt grass under his feet my mom had to pull into a bank parking lot. 2 days later an envelope in government beige was wedged between the bills in the mailbox window like it was peeking out to see if I'd scream. "Notice of re-examination," the header said in that D to him V font that seems printed by a machine from the 70s. They'd received a report alleging concerns about your ability to safely operate a motor vehicle. Anonymous. I could almost hear his voice doing pronouns gymnastics in the margins. I had to appear, within 14 days, for a vision and written evaluation and, at their discretion, a road test. If I didn't, automatic suspension. I drove there the next morning at 8 like I was late for jury duty I didn't remember signing up for. The lobby was a terrarium of anxiety, a teen in a hoodie eating a ripped paper, a man arguing quietly with an eye chart, a toddler feeding Cheerios to a plastic dinosaur. The examiner who called my name had nails like tiny throw pillows and a cardigan the color of toothpaste. "We'll just go around the block," she said. "You'll be fine." It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't not. In the parking lot she clicked her pen and watched me do the ritual. Mirrors. Seatbelt. Heat breath. She said, "When you are safe to do so, make a left out of the lot." Safe to do so. I checked, signaled, shoulder checked. The click-click filled the cabin, new and old at the same time. We went past the baseball field and the lemon yellow house with a porch swing like the universe had a very dry sense of humor. She asked for a right at a four-way, a lane change, a parallel park so generous you could have slid a school bus in. No narration. No binder. She said good once and okay 3 times. When we got back she tore the bottom off a form and handed me a slip of paper still warm where her hand had been. "You passed," she said. "Some people make it a lot, you know," she added, not like a question. I nodded because there wasn't anything useful to say that didn't feel like crying. The order worked 4 or 5 days, like a miracle you don't look at too hard. Then he found the holes. A brochure, tucked under my windshield wiper when I came out of the grocery store, glossy trifold from a local driving school with a post-it note that said "Please enroll" in a slanted print like a slur turned polite. I took a picture before I touched it and slid it into a gallon Ziploc. The deputy who handled my case told me not to go looking for him in every shadow, and also to save everything, which feels like opposite instructions until you try doing them both. That night he sent me 25 cents on Cash App with a note, "Merge now?" And then $1 with left? Like we were still playing his game, like you can make a court order tiny by typing into a tip field. I didn't decline or accept. I took screenshots with the date in the top and forwarded them to the officer with a subject line violation via payment app, which made me feel like a corporate email in a body that still wakes up at 3 a.m. On Saturday, an unmarked sedan idled at the end of our street for longer than cars idle. An hour later, the deputy called and said, neutrally, that they had him on a violation and he'd been taken in. "You don't need to come down," she said. "We'll email you the report when it posts." My mom was in the living room ironing pillowcases because that's the thing she does when she can't fix anything. I ate cereal out of a mixing bowl and watched a squirrel bully a blue jay off the fence and felt as if I was waiting for a grade in a class I'd never signed up for. The quiet felt weirdly loud. There was no elation, just space where the pinging used to be. I put my phone face down and my cat knocked it off the coffee table anyway and then fell asleep with one paw over her face like a little old lady. I'm collecting small stupid paperwork, now like you build a house out of index cards. The HR person from the clinic mailed my last check with a handwritten note on thick paper that bled a little when my fingers were damp. A place 2 towns over called and asked if I could start part-time while they figured out staffing. Their tech had met me at a C seminar forever ago and liked me enough to ask if I knew where the Roman IV catheters lived. On my first day, the doctor sent me on a home euthanasia with him because the family wanted someone who would talk soft. I drove the vet truck, an old Ford with a bench seat, and the directions were 3 lines, not 40, and nobody told me when to blank. We parked under a maple tree that drenched the windshield in shadow, and a golden retriever with white eyelashes put his head in my lap like he'd been practicing all week. After, we drove back a long way with the windows down. The truck smelled like chloride in time. At a light that turned yellow I eased through and the doctor didn't even look, just turned the radio down to ask if I liked empanadas from the food truck on Thursdays. When I got home there was another envelope on the mat, this one from the court, not beige but white with a window. His arraignment for the violation is at the end of the month. The protective order is still in effect. The deputy emailed a report, the line that says defendant contacted petitioner via financial application despite order prohibiting all forms of contact is funnier than it should be, and I read it twice because I couldn't believe life could be that specific and still true. At night I've been driving nowhere just to hear the turn signal ratchet along, my catacomb in the carrier, the lemon yellow house a landmark and then not. The laminated sheet lives in a drawer now with a rubber band around it. It's not an heirloom, but it's mine, the way evidence becomes part of your furniture until it doesn't. Yesterday I hit the car wash by the river and watched blue soap roll down the windshield in slow alien sheets. For a second it was like being underwater, sound muffled, the world viscous and new. The dryer roared and then shut off, sudden as a judge's hand, and I drove out into light that wasn't asking me permission to be there. Update 4. The quiet lasted exactly long enough for me to think it might harden into a new normal, like sap you could run your fingers over without sticking. Then a knock that sounded official even through wood, and a certified letter with my name printed in a font that has to be a cousin to DTMV font. I'd sent a public records request on a dare I made to myself at 2 a.m. Either see it in writing or stop imagining it, and they sent me back the report of unsafe operator that triggered my re-examination. It was him. Not his name anonymous, black marker over a line that didn't need black marker, just pages that smelled like a copier and had his grammar. He'd referred to me as the operator like I was a crane, and to himself as the co-regulator, which managed to be both medical and fake at the same time. There were diagrams. I am not exaggerating. Little rectangles for cars in 2 colors, arrows in green for safe trajectory, red for unapproved deviance, my Toyota a gray box labeled subject in all caps like I was a science experiment. He wrote that I had escalating risk behaviors, including lane change without pre-authorization and signal deployment unaccompanied by confirmation, and then footnoted see attached protocol like a law review article about my blinker. The last page had a table with a column called incidents and every entry was some version of turned. I put it on the kitchen table, the cat sat on the top right corner like she was signing it, and I laughed into my coffee so hard I had to put the mug down or wear it. I slid it into the manila envelope and the envelope felt heavier in a way paper can't be. 2 days later a man in a windbreaker that said process server in letters big enough to see from bad eyesight distance stood on my mom's porch like a Halloween decoration and handed me 2 stapled packets with a ceremony of someone delivering a verdict. Claim and delivery for the cat. Small claims for his share of the equity in a car and emotional damages due to elimination of co-pilot role $5,000, the maximum. He'd written vehicle co-ownership, on a line meant for serial numbers. The date was in 3 weeks. I circled it in my calendar like it was a dentist appointment I didn't consent to. My new clinic's HR let me take the morning off like it was nothing, which made it easier to breathe. The courtroom was smaller than the protection order one, less lemon cleaner, more coffee. The judge had a face like he could fix a lawnmower with a bobby pin. He came in with a stack of files like a diner waitress with plates up his arm. My ex had upgraded binders. This one had tab dividers that said car, cat, agreements, merge theory. I wish I was making that up. He smiled at me with all his teeth like he thought this was finally the venue that would understand him. He went first because he'd filed. He stood at the little podium and said co-pilot like it was a legal term, and then we had an understanding as if saying it slow could make it true. He said we had shared finances, which meant shared car, which meant he got half, plus consideration for the protocol development time because apparently watching me drive is billable. He said the cat was his because he had cleaned the litter box and provided enrichment. The judge held up a hand midway through the phrase enrichment activities and looked like he wanted to ask whether my ex had also pushed the cat on a swing. My turn was 3 sentences in some paper. Car title, my name. Loan, my name. Insurance, now only my name. Bank statements with his name only showing up next to Steam purchases than a Taco Bell that could have fed a little lead team. Adoption paperwork for the cat with my signature so big it could be a flag. Microchip registration in my name. A photo of me at 19 with that same cat as a kitten sleeping in my sleeve like a weird bicep. I said, he does not live with me and cannot legally contact me, and slid the protective order across. The judge didn't look at me, he looked at the order like it was a road sign he'd been waiting to point to all day. Petitions denied, he said, no jurisdiction to redistribute property that was never yours. Do not use this court to triangulate contact. He did that judge pause people talk about in books and then added, and sir, the cat is not a couch, which is how I know some phrases will live in my head rent-free forever. My ex tried to hand up a laminated sheet, the same one that had been on my coffee table. I could feel it in my mouth like a taste, and the judge said, without looking, do not hand me laminated anything, and my chest eased in a place I didn't know could loosen. We were called up to the clerk's window after, where a woman in a sweater that looked hand-knit told me my filing fee would be reimbursed and slid me a carbon copy. He hovered 6 feet back because that's the distance the bailiff's eyes made him keep. If that had been the only thing this week I would have slept through an earthquake. It wasn't. Midweek a DoorDash driver I'd never seen before knocked and smiled and handed me a craft paper bag with a receipt for driver ed kit. Inside, a plastic steering wheel from a kid's aisle and a printout of 10 rules for safe women drivers with clip art. The note on top said please accept his educational gift, his slanted print, the kind he uses when he wants to look grown. I took a photo of the bag on my doormat with the porch camera still frame time stamped in the corner and texted the deputy. She texted back on it 10 minutes later and then called to say they were picking him up on a new violation. Third-party delivery counts, take the afternoon if you need to. I did. I sterilized a G-18 needle and drew up vaccines for a pit mix named Sesame who licked my knuckles between syringes and leaned 40 pounds of trust against my leg. My phone pinged with a dull little tone I've assigned to the detective and I didn't look until lunch. In custody, the text said. No contact reiterated. Arraignment Monday. My sandwich tasted like relief and mustard. Monday's courthouse smelled like the other courthouse, which makes sense when all the marble is the same age. He wore the same too careful hair and a suit coat that didn't match his pants. The judge this time was newer, younger, eyes like a hawk that does not enjoy the view. The prosecutor read the delivery app out loud and something in the gallery made a noise they tried to swallow. He started to say educational intent and the judge lifted a hand. I've started to think comes with a rope. That's enough, she said, and remanded him pending hearing. He looked up for the first time and I watched the moment he realized jail might be an actual place he would live, not a threat's throw at a hallway. I didn't want revenge in that instant. I wanted silence that stuck. 3 hours after that, at the DAMV, I picked up a license with my new address on it and ordered plates because the clerk said the wait list was open now and sometimes you get lucky. People pick their kids' names out with less thought, she said, chewing a pen cap. I wrote Aquatern on the little blue form and laughed when I realized my hands had stopped shaking by the time I dotted the K like it was a thing with dots. They'll mail it in 6 to 8 weeks. It felt like writing a secret message to myself I'll get to read later on the highway in daylight. At the clinic, a woman brought in a plastic bin full of kittens that looked like dust bunnies that learned to squeak. We set them up in an exam room with a heating pad and one of those toy tracks with a ball that never comes out. I clipped their tiny claws and they grabbed my fingers like sailors on ropes. The doctor nodded at the bank parking lot when we drove back from a house call and I knew he was going to say empanadas, and he did, and we ate in the cab with our knees pressed to the glove box and a line of orange sauce on both our chins. He told a story about a goat who outsmarted a fence and nothing, and it was a parable and it was perfect that way. At dusk, my mom asked if I wanted her to sit passenger for a grocery run, the way people ask if you want a glass of water when you've been crying. I said no, soft, and she said okay like she meant it. I put the cat carrier in the backseat and she meowed once as if for the record and then fell asleep so hard her whiskers twitched in dreams. I took the long road on purpose. Past the baseball field with a chain link bruised from decades of balls and hands. Past the lemon yellow house where someone had put a new swing up and you could see it moving even without anybody on it. The light went yellow and my foot did the thing feet know, and the turn signal ticked like an old watch with nothing to do but be steady. No one in the passenger seat breathed like a metronome. No one corrected me with a word that sounded like a siren only I could hear. I made a left because I wanted to turn left, and for a second it felt like standing in a room where the air conditioner finally shut off and you realize you've been shouting all day without knowing it. When I got home there was a white envelope peeking out of the mailbox like a shy paper animal. Court date for the violation hearing, end of the month, his name typed smaller than the warning underneath it. I tucked it behind the magnet that holds up the map to the dog park and my manila envelope went back in the drawer, heavier again, still mine. The quiet came back and didn't ask permission either.